to introduce our first speakers from GMR Marketing. Chris Learman is the VP of Strategy and is a veteran at GMR Marketing, working there since 2006. She has worked on both sides of the desk and has experience with consumer-facing brands such as McDonald's, Miller Brewing Company, and other Fortune 500 companies. Elke Jones is the Chief Strategy Officer and leads GMR's team of global planners, turning brand information, consumer insights, and cultural trends into experiential solutions to her clients' biggest marketing challenges. With more than 15 years at GMR, Elke also oversees the agency's global brands, communications, and culture initiatives. Let's give a nice warm welcome.
I just want to make sure, yep, it's working.
Are we on?
We're good.
Check,
We're
check,
good.
check. Well,
Hit the video.
shall we?
Yeah.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carl. So it seems like every other week, the kiddos of Generation Z seem to come out with new slang terms that quite frankly confuse the rest of us older generations. So the goal today is to learn how to speak some of that Gen Z lingo. And joining me today on how to translate some phrases is our favorite spokesperson for the Gen Z kids, my cousin Brock. Say hello, Brock. Brock, say hello.
Sup?
Alright, let's get started.
You guys have the Wi-Fi password?
Alright, Brock, we're gonna start with some simple ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, how are you?
Saw.
Friends,
Fam.
family.
Fam jam.
It was a fun event.
The fest was lit.
Okay,
Oh,
I'm about to leave.
I'm finna dipset.
Those are some neat shoes.
Them kicks are drippin'.
I would be glad to help.
Bet.
My favorite team lost.
Dudes took an L.
My favorite team lost very bad.
Dudes got clapped.
He seems upset.
He little mad.
He seems very upset.
He big mad.
I like this music.
That's a bop.
I'm not lying.
No cap.
I'm sorry that happened to you.
Oof.
That's an interesting statement.
Weird flex, but okay.
I'm not a fan of these appetizers.
These apps are booty.
I completely agree with that statement.
Facts.
I agree.
Yeet yeet.
Excuse me.
Yeet.
Wow, that's exciting news.
Yeet.
Congratulations on your baby boy.
Yeet.
What does yeet even mean?
Yeet is yeet.
That doesn't help. It's like when fam comes slipping in with their drippin' swag, jamming to some sick bop. And no cap, you know these facts are about to be litty fresh to death. You're like, oh. I'm not big mad at that bitter response.
Yeet.
I don't get it.
Weird flex, but okay.
I don't know.
All right. Give it up for that video. It's pretty humorous. We agree. First of all, thank you so much for inviting us to be here today, and thank you, Jimmy, for that amazing opening. People usually don't refer to us as being important, so we'll take it. Right. And we'd love to open with that video because it is humorous and it seems somewhat extreme, but I can honestly say, as a mom of two Gen Z kids, it's not unusual for us to have dinner conversation and we're talking about, somebody's got tea, and that almost always happens. My daughter's still talking about HOCO because that was lit. But my son doesn't agree because all the freshman girl are extra. So every time my husband and I think we've got it down, we've got the lingo, they come home with a new phrase, new words, or somebody new that they're following on YouTube, and all I can say is dead. So, experiential marketing, that's what we do at GMR. And by show of hands, is everyone somewhat familiar with experiential marketing? And it's okay if you're not. So it looks like most people are. For us, experiential marketing is about taking a brand and making it IRL through an experience. And an experience that's meant to prime memory making. And with that, I'm going to show you this quote from the great philosopher, Dr. Seuss. And sometimes you'll never know the value of a moment until it becomes a memory. And it is so true. So think about it like this. Maybe there was a family vacation you took a couple years ago and you thought it was going to be super lame, but you're still talking about it. Or what about the party you went to that you thought was going to be epic, but no one's even talking about it anymore and it's completely forgotten? So this idea is incredibly true. So going from Dr. Seuss to somebody that we work with, Dr. Dave, microphone? Okay. Sorry about that. This is IRL, so that happens. But going from Dr. Seuss to Dr. Dave Bonesack, who is somebody that we work with, and he's been studying memory making for the last 3 years. And this is a bunch of science. So I'm going to break down what he learned from his study in a way that I can understand. But basically, there are 2 types of memories. There's episodic memory, which is something that comes into your brain and you store it there for a period of time, somewhat brief, maybe something like what you had for dinner Monday night. But then there's autobiographical memory. And those are the memories that are born out of experiences that are so rich that they stay with us for a very long time. An example of that might be the first live concert you ever went to. Most people in this room could probably remember that. And usually that's because it's connected to something else. It might be the people you're with, like your tribe, or it could be the environment that you're in, like a beach. Or it could be just that it's something that you're so passionate about or you love, like live music. So with all of that, it's obvious that we live in this experience economy and how important experiences are. And 73% of people, according to this study by Set Creative, has said that they're more likely to purchase a product if they've taken part of a memorable live brand experience. And furthermore, you could say that millennials are sort of responsible for this boom in the experience economy. However, it's really impacting all of our generations. And according to a study earlier this year by McKinsey, and they asked millennials again how important experiences are, 78% said they still favor an experience over something physical or a product or a good. But again, this transcends all generations. So I'm going to give you an example of what it was like to shop when someone of my generation, and I'm Gen X, was about 19, 20 years old. So I want a pair of acid wash jeans. And not because they're ironic, because they're actually cool. And so I go to the Gap. The Gap doesn't have a lot of sizes. They don't have talls. I am a tall girl, and it's one size. They don't have curvy, so your options are limited. And they don't have a lot of styles. So I grab my acid wash jeans, and I pay by cash or check, and I piece out of the Gap. But today, the expectations are different. Consumers are looking for an experience. So shopping and how we shop has changed. Who would think that you could take a yoga class at Lululemon, or listen to a DJ at Urban Outfitter, or have a beer at Nordstrom's, or purchase a sustainable sweatshirt at Zara and have it customized on site? That's because our expectations have changed, and that's how we shop. And again, this transcends generations. So if you think about it, our lives are really just a series of memories that are strung together. Now, the autobiographical memories that I talked about earlier, those really big moments, those are the brightest bulbs. Some of our memories are maybe more dim, like what you had for dinner Monday night. But then there are those things that you just don't even remember, and those become the spaces in between. So what Chris and I do at GMR is we work with brands to create these really rich experiences in order to become the brightest bulbs on that string of lights. And so our belief and our purpose at GMR is really to create memories that matter on behalf of brands. And here are a couple of examples. For Comcast Xfinity, which by the way is not a very well-liked brand, or they weren't. Most people don't love their cable companies. We did a partnership with Katy Perry. We did a surprise and delight, and these 2 girls got to meet her backstage. It was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Or 2 guys that are super fans of the Mariners. Esurance put them on the road for every single game, and they created a content series, kind of living their best lives, to be honest. Or 20 years ago, we took a group of friends and put them on the North Pole to party their faces off with Molson Ice. And that's something that really had never even been done at the time. So this is the importance of creating these really rich, immersive experiences that become part of your autobiographical memory. And so the brand is very sticky. You retain, you recall, and make hopefully that purchase decision when you think about that great positive brand experience that you had. All right, so we use a lot of science when we think about how we create these experiences. I talked about some of the research that we did with Dr. Dave Bonesack, but it's also really important that we understand human beings. What makes us tick? What are our emotional needs? What are we looking for? What are our expectations? This is why we study generations. This is why it is so important that we understand how to connect with Gen Z, how we can be relevant. We're also starting to look at Gen Alpha. That doesn't mean we're not thinking about and studying boomers and Gen Y and Gen X. It's incredibly important. But in addition to the science behind experiential marketing, there's also the art. And I think for marketers, it's really important that we remember that there's creativity involved in creating great brand work for clients and for brands. It requires us to be comfortable using our intuition and trusting our gut. It requires us to tap the creative side of our brains, and it's really critically important that we understand what's happening in culture. And Chris is going to talk about this a lot. We are living in a very interesting time. I'm sure everybody in this room would agree, and you have to be very aware of what's happening in culture in order to create the right types of brand experiences.
So I get to talk about the science part because Elke is very good at the art part, and we all have our roles in the company. But one of the things that we try to do is practice a certain type of rigor. So Elke told you the what and the why. I'm going to get a little bit into the how we get to understanding a cohort, especially Gen Z in this particular case. So we start with a general footprint where we understand or try to understand a life stage point, these universal truths where everybody's going through basically the same thing because it's based on biology. So if I'm a teenager or if I'm a young adult going through puberty for the first time in 12-16, it's not that different than somebody in 2019. The physical concept is the same. And it drives a lot of our developmental processes, both emotional and physical, and how we leave our pack and build a new one. The other thing that we look at are things that we call transient factors. So one of the really big, important things is understanding how generations influence each other. And we're going to spend some time talking about that. We also look at things that are really important innovation. So whether it was the printing press, or it was the Industrial Revolution, or today, the information age that has come about because of technology. It has the ability to completely change society and the way that we live and how we interact with each other. And then the other thing that we look at are geopolitical issues. What's going on today in post-World War II construct where we're actually pulling apart the way that we've lived for the last 50 years and new powers are coming in play, and what's going on with finances, and what does the Great Recession, how does that influence all of us? So we look at all those things to understand what we would say is a trend. So starting off with that more foundational thing, we look at a process or a developmental tract from Erikson, which is Erikson's stage of psychosocial development. I can do it, I can't say it. But what that tracks is what we're all doing basically at the same time during our lives. And if you look in that 13 and 19-year-old area where it says adolescence, that's largely where Generation Z is right now. They're building their personal identity. We don't play much with the under 13 just because there's some laws and some ethics about marketing to people who are under a certain age. But this whole area of identity is a really big play for Gen Z. The next phase is early adulthood and adulthood. And at this point in time, We're building our own lives. We're feathering our nest. We're finding our love interest and our mate forever and friends that will be the foundation for our lives, and we're building something. Then we move into middle adulthood, where we're really looking back a little bit and making sure that what we've done is fitting into our purpose and adjusting that if it's not. This is a point where people start often culling and pulling some things out of their nest that don't work any longer. And then at the end, we're looking back and hoping that everything that we've done has provided some integrity in our lives and that we have a level of wisdom. So this is the general footprint. By understanding where someone is in that life stage, it's a foundation that helps us understand where they may be emotionally. The other thing that we find particularly interesting is this generation influence. So these are the generations that are defined as of today. We don't have Generation Alpha up here. Gen Alpha really is 8 and younger. So they're bundled into Gen Z at the moment, but they are going to split off, and we'll be looking at them separately. Generations generally run anywhere from 16 to 20 years. It depends on how big that generation is and what are some of the markers that happen in society that help us bundle them. So when we really started paying attention for the first time to these generational confines was with baby boomer. Baby boomers seems to kind of make the world all about them. And that's where we started. It's a very huge group. And some of the things that would mark them as unique from other generations is that they were coming of age during the 50s and the 60s when there was a growing, burgeoning middle class. And so everything was safe and secure and plentiful. They were also children of the silent generation and the greatest generation who read this book by Dr. Spock, who said, you should raise your children to be individuals. There's a break from the way things used to be. The other major marker is birth control came out. And so baby boomers could choose to have children, and they could do so for their own self-identity. It was no longer something that just happened, or you have as many kids as you can to be able to farm the land, because some of them will kick off because you didn't have antibiotics. You can now choose. So they're very influential. After that are Gen Xers, Elke, Gen Xer. These are latchkey kids. They grew up in what you would call the television generation, and in the shadow of baby boomers. And they tend to be pretty pragmatic. At the time that they were first identified, everybody called them the slacker generation and expected very little to come out of them, which is ironic because they've changed a lot in the world. After that are the millennials. They're the children of baby boomers, helicopter parents. So we've seen a lot of millennials be very idealist and maybe have a hard time launching, but they have changed the rules of engagement so things are fairer and more universal for everyone else. And then lastly, we have Gen Z, and they are definitely responding to the influence of millennials before them, maybe cynically a little bit, and then are clearly the children of Gen Xers, definitely pragmatic, but one of the key markers is they are coming about in really insecure times. So that has ended up being a really important influence in the way that they operate. So looking at trends again, I just threw out some visuals that help identify where we are at this point in time, how important technology is, artificial intelligence, and that actually being a person through Instagram, the whole idea of Jeff Bezos and Amazon eating the world, some of the celebrities, the importance of diversity and how that's changing our world. Tesla, what's happening with automobiles and what's going to be the future. Greta and her activism. How is that changing the world? And the world is changing based on global warming. All of these things are things that are in our heads all of the time and through media all the time, and they have had a lot of influence on Gen Z. The other thing that we look at is brands that are doing a good job on moving with the times. So we want to make sure that we are offering our brand partners the opportunity to stay relevant, because those brands that stay true to their values and true to their purpose, but move with the times, are the ones that are most relevant. So Dove is a great example in the way that they've redefined themselves and new audiences. Hanes is another example, but those brands that are moving in step with trends, but staying true to a core purpose, are the ones that we keep our eye on. So I'm going to move to Gen Z, and really quickly, at a glance, give you a little bit of demographic information. Right now, there are roughly 95 million Gen Z in the world, or in the US. Their buying power is almost $2.2 billion. And median income for those who are employed is about $75,000. Quarter are married, and then a very few are graduated and have kids in the household under 18. So these are really kind of boring, flat statistics. What I want to do is hand this over to somebody by the name of Maddie Hammond to talk to you about Gen Z in her own terms.
A couple years ago, I used to come home from school crying because I heard a tough story about the news. A tough story in class, a tough discussion. But by the next year, I was numb to it. I had no reaction to any stories at all. And this is a problem. Everyone is hearing these stories. This is the thought process. We're hearing all these stories, everyone else is hearing them, no one else is affected. Why am I so much affected? Why am I afraid? Why am I afraid of clowns? Why am I afraid of being shot? This is the worst part. It's not the news, it's feeling like you have to act like it doesn't affect you, like it doesn't matter. Like I said, I was scared in 6th and 7th grade. 7th grade was also the year that I tried to go without crying. And the reason being because I didn't want to seem weak or vulnerable. I was proud to say that I succeeded. I didn't cry once that entire year because I didn't want to seem weak or vulnerable. This is a 12-year-old. And then the next year, when I learned about suicide bombers, I would run through situations of everyone I knew dying in my head just to make sure that if and when it actually happened, I wouldn't cry. Like I said, this is a 12-year-old. This is my thought process as a 12-year-old. And a big part that influenced my thinking was the women's empowerment movement, which is great. It's one of the best things that's happened in the past 100 years. But now, teen girls like me, if you feel the pressure, we feel pressured like we have to be tough, fight the patriarchy, don't cry, don't show emotion, don't be vulnerable. But we are so surrounded by the news and the media and scary things that sometimes we have to be vulnerable. And we really just want to be told that it's going to be all right sometimes. But there is no making it stop. So really, the best thing we can do is to take the exposure to the media and the sources that are exposing us and flip them back on themselves to create positive change. And we are seeing this already.
So this is Maddie talking about some of the pinch points of being Gen Z and the worries and the daily reminders that they live in a world that's not very safe. We're not going to focus on that the whole entire time, but I think it's a really important factor in understanding this particular group's need for security. So in this particular page, there's two different things to focus on. One of the things we thought was incredibly important is on the bottom of the slide. And there's a company called Gartner. I know that they're here today. We subscribe to one of their trend companies called Iconoculture that we rely on. And what Iconoculture does is on an annualized basis, they go out and they ask people to rate a value set of 96 different values. And Gen Z scored these particular values as higher than all others in general population. So words like adventure, purpose, experience, diversity, ambition, discovery, creativity, expertise, enjoyment, individuality. If you look at that bundle of words, without seeing the rest of them, they mean internal growth, and it's just somebody who is working on themselves rather than being concerned about society or family. It's all internal. So I think it's very interesting to look at Gen Z and the way that they're processing the world in a very personal manner. Some core things that came out, I would say pillars that we noticed about Gen Z that we're going to talk about a little bit. Number one, the importance of self-expression and inclusion, which really keys over to diversity. The fact that they're living a digital life. So even though we're all living in the real world, IRL, there is a lot of digital connection, and we know that they're spending, I think 50% of Gen Z told us they're spending over 10 hours a day connected to the internet. They're stability seekers. We kind of see why after we hear Maddie and how afraid she is of the clowns and the shootings, and the world's kind of coming at them. They were born during or just before 9/11. They lived through the Great Recession. They've seen kind of all the icky stuff happen. So they're looking for stability. They're very interesting in the side hustles that they put together, and that is really hopeful and exciting. So we'll show you a few examples of that. And lastly, they're activists, and they're doing that in some really interesting ways as well. So starting off with self-expression, as we talked about that whole area of development on self-identity and building your identity as you're younger, Gen Z is really doing a lot of work on that individuality portion in their identity formation. Diversity is a really big motivator for them. They do not see color, shape, age. We're all just people. So they are very naturally inclusive and really are other blind. They also are very open to gender fluidity. There are, I think it was 56% of Gen Z know somebody who's using gender neutral pronouns. And they really believe in, just you be you and the world will be okay.
So here's one example. This comes from Eric Franz, who's 20, who's a white man, but rather than leave it at that, he includes his preferred pronouns, he, him, his, on his email signature to respectfully acknowledge the different gender identities of his peers.
Shania Stevenson, she's a daughter of immigrants from Jamaica and Guyana, but she intentionally describes herself as pansexual black wimix. Anyone want to try that? I have no idea how to say that. But her whole point is she doesn't see womanhood as a foil to maleness, so she doesn't see herself as a woman. Gen X are also digital power users. We know that. We talked about the 10 hours online. They are navigating a multitude of social media outlets, and they're very good at mastering all of them and understanding how you should put yourself out or brand yourself on the different social media outlets. There's also a pretty interesting movement that's happening where a lot of younger Gen Z are kind of scrapping social media altogether, or choosing channels that are, say, Snap, or others that are just for them, and they are private channels rather than public channels where grandma, mom, aunt so-and-so can see what they're doing. They also believe that they are super empowered because they can use any search tool to find anything that they could possibly ever want. And if you actually go online and listen to Maddie Hammond's full speech, which I suggest you do, she talks about the power of feeling like if she lived 50 years ago, there's no way she could have as much knowledge as she does now because she's packed so much in from being online so many hours in a day. And then the other thing is that they've learned how to practice discernment because of how intrusive social media can be in our lives. That means that they are more calculated in how they're making decisions. They're doing a lot of research and making sure before they pull a trigger. This is an example of somebody by the name of Tita Gann. And she's got a very robust online life. This is an Instagram account of hers. And one of the reasons we pulled this up as an example is that it's showing the movement toward micro-influencers instead of celebrity influencers. So while celebrity influencers are still out there, it's not very authentic. People know they're getting paid. But when it comes down to micro-influencers, they may have a smaller following, but you know that they actually are involved in what it is that they're pushing. The other thing that is an important differentiator is awkward humor. So I put a couple things up here that are hard to read, and so I'll read you the captions. But the point of this is that Gen Z is using awkward humor and sometimes cynicism to diffuse this crazy world they're living in. It helps them put that in control by making it even crazier. So you see the cat, Belgian police using a new 200-mile-per-hour hover cat during terrorist operations. This was being posted when there was a terrorist attack in Belgium, and this was the way that folks were handling it while they were sitting in their apartments, knowing that there were bombs going on. They were making surrealistic digital memes. The other one, this girl in the red says, as a millennial, she's stepping up in line for their swimming exercise. It's part of a movie. I'll be the victim. And then the Gen Z girl, all your life. So they definitely have sarcasm, darkness in their humor, and they poke at millennials quite a bit. Gen Z is also stability seeking. So as we talked about that, because this world is so crazy, they're looking for things that kind of mellow out the fear for them. And then side hustles. Gen Z is doing a great job in building small microsites and businesses that are solving things, real world things. This particular example is called iCoolKid, and this young man from London put together a website that is almost like a trend site for teens. He's talking about what events are happening, what things to wear, what's cool, what's happening around town that's age appropriate for Gen Z. From that, he built a consultancy called Thread, where he's helping to give brands better ideas on how to manage their own business. And then lastly, as we talked about, Gen Z are catalyst citizens. So we know Greta and all of her efforts. We know David Hogue and that crew from the shooting. They're all very stalwart activists, and they understand how to use social media to push their agenda. There's also other things that, there's an app that allows you, that actually you can sign up for, and they do 5-minute music plays to take a shower by to help you limit how much water you're using. So there's a lot of different ways that Gen Z are playing in this space to help us be better citizens, because they don't really think that our generations have done a very good job at it. So younger consumers are reforming their identities around their interests, intents, and habits, making a shift away from traditional definitions of gender, sexuality, race, and demographics. Okay, so we're gonna give you a few thoughts on how we think marketing to Gen Z works. We'll see. First of all, they have some serious expectations about brands. They expect us to be authentic. They expect brands to be diverse and portray youth very honestly instead of maybe model. They expect brands to deliver experience, to meet them where they are, which would be in media, especially social media. They prefer native content. We'll talk about what that actually means. I'm not sure if you guys have touched on native advertising. We'll get there. And then they love it when brands or companies can help them with their entrepreneurial efforts.
All right, so I'm going to take us through a couple of examples. Who's heard of the Taco Bell Hotel? All right, good set of hands. Amazing experience of a disruptive or way for a brand to act in a disruptive way. So everyone's competing to get Gen Z's attention, and Taco Bell decided to create an experience, again, a very immersive, multi-sensorial experience that really sort of taps into some of the needs and values of Generation Z. So it's a bit novel. It's also a bit humorous, but it's also very authentic. And so we love this example, and I know it got a lot of pickup with certain celebrities, from what I understand, it's almost impossible to even get a reservation at the Taco Bell hotel. And, you know, the whole entire experience is a really big branded moment. So you've got floaties that look like sauce packets, etc. So this is a really, really great example of authenticity.
Another thing that we talked about is the idea of being very honest, portraying imagery that is really real. If you're thick, be thick. Show that. Show us that clothes fit all different body sizes. Show diversity. Show the reality of life, not the perfect of life. And that has a lot of power for them because, as we said before, they are looking for equality, diversity, and they are anyone blind, so they expect brands to understand that about them and portray that and actually live it rather than just mouthpiece it.
So we've been banging on this whole notion of how important experiences are, but I think this is another really great example. Tiffany is obviously a jewelry brand. It's somewhat premium. It's not luxury like Cartier, but it does not draw in this younger Gen Z audience. It's not like you're going to Forever 21 to buy some bangles. So what they needed to do is sort of reimagine that shopping experience in order to connect with Gen Z. So they did that by offering things like a vending machine and a very interactive store experience in order to connect with this audience. Again, very, speaking in a very relevant and authentic way.
Again, meeting them in the media. So this means not only being where they are, which is in social media, but it's also doing that in a way that's bringing value, bringing interest, making it better than when you came. So don't just hit me with the same thing over and over again or be banner ads. How can you interact with me, make it interesting, and get me excited that I'm actually meeting a brand, because the way that not only the content matters, but the interface matters.
And here's a great example of native content. It was a partnership between Netflix and the Tab, and basically they were leveraging some insights about Gen Z. So a little bit of play, a little bit of fun, but also this desire for personalization and customization. So they actually released a quiz in order to get at sort of your preferences and your personality to make viewing recommendations.
Thanks. And then lastly, building loyalty, being an advocate or a mentor for this entrepreneurial spirit. So on the left, if you guys go on YouTube and look at this particular video, there's a link down on the bottom. This is a shoe for cheerleaders, which is kind of an uncovered market. And the agency that put this together actually collaborated with a troupe of cheerleaders. The girl who's in the advertisement is actually doing tumbles in the advertising agency. I think it's Wieden & Kennedy, Portland, actually. And you see her tumbling down the stairs, in a good way, not the way I would tumble down the stairs, but showing how you use the product, what's important to them, and she co-created it with them. What's that?
I'm sorry, I was going to say hold on this slide.
Hold that.
I was going to say hold on this slide, please.
Oh, definitely will. The other one is Juve Consulting, and this is a coalition of students, college students, that came together through a number of different universities to help brands who just don't get Gen Z, because I think a lot of us are really doing it wrong. And so they pulled together to help consult for the brands that are just really off and not understanding the values and what's important to them.
All right, I'm going to do a time check. Lauren, how are we doing on time, knowing we want to leave some time for questions?
15, 20 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we brought a couple of case studies that we think are really, really great examples of how to connect with Gen Z and really reach Gen Z from a brand perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share an insight or some insights that led to the campaign that I'm going to show, the campaign, and then I'll just talk a little bit about why it was effective or what we learned from it. So the first one is Doritos. And the insight here is that Doritos is a really iconic brand, just by the nature of the shape of the chip itself. Plus, if you think about it, the Dorito dust that's left on your fingers, that's somewhat iconic as well, and it's very true to the Doritos brand because it ends up everywhere. You're wiping it or whatever. So they've got some assets that are iconic to Doritos. And they sort of realized that a brand that doesn't continue to evolve can become stale. See what I did there? And it's true. If they're stagnant, then the brand's not going to grow. So they felt like they needed to rethink how they wanted to speak to Gen Z, and this was the result.
The following is a paid message for a chip so iconic, we don't need to name it. Because this is an ad with no logos, no jingles, no gimmicks. Just those red and blue bags with the stuff you love in it. 3 sides to this story. It's the corner store crunch that had you trade your buddies for it if they packed a pack at lunch. No logo, but our name stays on the tip of your tongue when you're shaking for crumbs once that bag is done. Man, you know the brand. Felt the dust, asked for one, doubled up, hit the shelf and called dibs on that last bit. This is that sweet, cheesy, salty, spicy, crispy, crunchy, flavor-packed bodega snack that rhymes with, I need those. The chip that changed the game and bagged greatness. You can taste it. But an ad with no logo? That's another level.
Yeah, so great example, pretty bold move for a brand. And they executed this in a really big way. So they actually went back and deleted all of their previous content on social media. They actually created the hashtag no logo here. And then they had some interesting partnerships as well. So how effective was this campaign? Well, it was pretty darn effective. Doritos sits in the top 2 preferred salty snacks for Gen Z, alongside the other brand is Cheetos. The next example comes to us from a brand called Asos. Does anyone shop Asos online? It's an online retailer, a couple of hands. Pretty awesome collection of apparel and streetwear, et cetera. And they're all about diversity. And that's really their brand purpose and their brand ethos. But instead of just talking about it, they decided that they, in order to really connect and be authentic with Gen Z, was live their brand purpose. And so they did that through this really interesting collaboration. So we'll take a look.
I joined Collusion because I wanted to be part of something that creates the change that I want to see.
More trans people, more non-binary people, more dark-skinned black people, more East Asian models, all of this, you know?
With Collusion, this is something that's been built with intention and has taken a while to craft through so many delicate and fragile conversations.
And then by me sitting back and listening, I'm learning so much more.
A lot of the time in my generation, everyone likes to pretend that we all have it figured out. But coming into this and actually being like, no, we actually don't know what we're doing. We're figuring it out and we want a brand to kind of represent that.
It really is a brand that accepts everyone. A brand that allows other people to see themselves in it.
I'm gonna be able to say, I did that, I contributed to that, and that's sick. Other people like me can see it and feel like if she can do it, I can do it as well.
Community means a lot to me. As a working class queer woman of colour, you know, it's like, and it's what I need to survive.
I love that example. And they even take it so far as to extend it to some of their lines. They have Asos Curve, which is meant for women of all sizes, et cetera. So what's interesting about this is at the end of 2018, sales on Asos were down, but across Gen Z, as of Q2 of 2019, sales are up 18%. So pretty interesting collaboration with young designers that are really representing a very diverse population and making them part of the brand.
Of these examples, this is the one that I had the hardest time with, not because I don't appreciate the intent. It was more because it didn't fit the traditional template that you would expect of advertising, where you state your logo and then you tell what you're trying to do and then you do it and then you tell people again. So this one is really innovative, very new, and definitely fits the Gen Z target.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Chris. With all of these examples, I think the overriding sort of thing that's happening at a macro level is that advertisers, marketers realize we're talking to an audience that does not want to be marketed to. So we have to do things that are clever but authentic, interesting but relevant, and it's difficult. It's difficult to find the right, because there's a lot of epic fails out there, guys. I'm sure, you know, hashtag Pepsi, like there's a lot of brands that are doing things they're not doing things the right way. And there's a lot of backlash or clapback as a result. So I think, it's really making sure you understand what it is, what are the needs, what are the values to create campaigns and to create marketing that really connects. My next example comes from Sprite, and this is actually out of Brazil. So similar to the SATs, in Brazil, in order to get into college, you have to take this grueling 2-day test, and it's brutal, from what I understand. And what Sprite decided to do was find a way to immerse the brand into the young audiences, sort of into their life during this very, very stressful time. They also had a bit of psychology and some research and learnings that apparently when you are doing something very difficult, it's much easier for you to sort of remember and learn something that's sort of connected to that difficult task. So what they did is they worked with some teachers to create a playlist that was teaching the students the formulas that they needed to learn in order to master the test. So we'll look at these.
A 2-day test. To get in college in Brazil, you need to pass a test. A really, really tough test, where you have to memorize tons of different formulas. But Sprite decided to refresh the way teens study.
Figura de linguagem ruim de não cair. Quando eu achar na prova vou me divertir.
Formula songs. 6 teachers, 5 different subjects. Transforming the most crucial formulas into sticky songs for teens to study.
A gente teve esse convite da Sprite para fazer esses vídeos com os professores. Foi uma coisa bastante desafiadora, porque eles não são cantores, mas são pessoas que estão acostumadas a lidar com o público.
A ideia era a gente usar 4 linguagens diferentes para cada tipo de videoclipe.
Figura de linguagem ruim de não cair. Quando eu achar na prova vou me divertir.
Seno sobre cosseno. Negativo onde ocorre a corrosão.
Energia potencial, gravitacional, vamos falar. É o famoso
A refresh way to add some culture and pop culture.
Energia potencial, gravitacional, vamos falar.
So pretty interesting. Definitely something that we don't see a lot of. I think it's, again, kind of a bold move on Sprite's part, but there's a bit of additional brilliance here, which is beyond that moment when you're listening to these songs. You guys know when you get a song stuck in your head. So now Sprite is part of somebody's potentially autobiographical memory because they're recalling the lyrics, they're singing the song to themselves over and over, and it's very sticky and has a much kind of longer lasting effect. I don't have any results to share because the results are still pending.
And we're going to, we've got about 5 minutes left. Want to wrap up so we can take some questions?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, sounds good.
Great. So anyway, we just kind of wanted to wrap this with observation that Gen Z obviously is this digital purebred. They're super risk averse. So they're looking for individuality and personal connection, but they really want to do that within a safe setting. There's really a lot of opportunity for brands to help support them by celebrating themselves, but also giving them a sense of assurance and a sense of control. So I didn't mean to cut us off so quick, but I want to make sure we get some chance to...
It's okay, even though that was my favorite example, the last one.
We can play it.
It's okay.
It's up to you guys.
It's okay. Cheers.
All right. Here we go.
Oh, we're going to play it?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so this comes from a brand called Oasis, and it's a sugary drink. And what I think is really interesting about this marketing campaign is they sort of recognize the fact that Gen Z are actually smart and savvy, and they understand, like they have a good bullshit detector, basically. And so they decided to kind of take a shot at advertising. And so this is the campaign.
Everyone is different. But can we rely on experts to unite people when a fruity drinks brand could obviously do a better job?
Says drink together.
Yes, it does, mate.
Shall we? Yeah, well, for what, we just share a bottle? Why don't you go first? No, in fact, let me go first. Oh, right.
Imagine if a single bottle could be enjoyed by 2 people.
From the same bottle at the same time.
So we've got to drink from it together.
Together? Are you okay with that?
It's fine.
Let's just do this.
Okay. Oasis, togetherness. Buy together. Drink together. Together.
Come in.
Harmony. Just a few billion sales away. Not in shops, doesn't fit on shelves.
It was worth it, right?
Yeah.
Here's what I love about this. This is a brand, it's a sugary drink, and they felt like they could not play in a space of purpose and doing good in the world because they don't have permission to do that. It's a sugary drink. So they decided to, take a different route and just poke fun and be ridiculous and use humor instead of, they're kind of making fun of like these very serious, like, we're all going to save the world campaigns, but they're doing it in a way that feels very, very right for this brand. So thanks for letting me share that one. I love it.
It was a good call, by the way. So.
Okay, so we are gonna take some time for questions now, but please stay seated. We have the Milwaukee Bucks coming up next and how they're marketing to Gen Z and talking a lot about the Greek Freak, so it's gonna be awesome. So we have 2 microphones, one's coming down each aisle, so raise your hand if you have a question, and we're gonna jump right into that.
I just want to thank you guys for coming, first off, but you mentioned that Gen Z is just such a unique generation. Is it hard using data to drive the targeting and drive the campaigning since we're so unique?
I'm sorry, I had a hard time hearing. Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, so since we're so unique, or since Generation Z is so unique, is it hard to use data to prove and to analyze the campaigns?
Do you want to take that one or you want me to
Well,
take one?
yeah, I think that there's so much data, but the more we get better at data, the more we're realizing its limitations. So I would say there's an opportunity to really, really understand this generation and all generations in buying habit because data has become so seamless. Aggregating data and being able to have access to it is really kind of at our fingertips. The thing that goes back to the art and science part of it, you can look at data, but you have to breathe some life into it. You have to be a storyteller. So I think you can look at data and go really sideways by just looking at data without really kind of understanding the factors around it. That's why we spend so much time understanding the soft sides of it. So to your question, I think there's tons of data, maybe too much data. And the more we rely on ourselves to have a common sense about it, the better the data reflects good decision making.
Good question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. What are some of the steps that you take when cultivating a marketing campaign for experiential marketing per company to make sure it's really unique to that company, but also that you are not talking down to the generation or making something that doesn't feel authentic?
That's a great question. It's a pretty rigorous process, and it usually starts with hopefully a great client brief and really understanding what is it that we're trying to accomplish or what's the job to be done. For us, we look at a lot of different things. So we look at data. We look at emerging cultural signals because culture plays such a big part in how we as humans interact with the world. We have a bit of proprietary research that we leverage that's really about understanding people's needs, emotional needs, and what they're seeking out of experiences. And so we have all of these inputs, and we sort of analyze all of these different things. But then what we're looking for is, we always are trying to fight against something. So conventions. Conventions are the ways that brands act the same. It's crazy to think about how many of them do this, particularly in financial services, healthcare. They look the same, they talk the same, and it's literally insert logo here. So we look at all of these inputs and say, based on all of this, where can we break away? And it's finding what we call it white space. And once we have that white space, then we feel like that's the place where we can really play and bring forward and ideate concepts, big campaign ideas, or even kind of at a tactical level. But it's using data and it's using all of our tools and then looking at what everyone else is doing and say, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this.
And part of that is really understanding what that brand stands for, what its purpose is, and what its differentiator is. So as much time as we spend with understanding the consumer, we're doing the same thing with the brand so that we're understanding the consumer, the brand, and the environment on where we can really make that experience pop out in a place that feels like white space.
Good question.
How's it going? Over here.
Hello.
So you talked a lot about how Gen Z right now is going through finding their identity. So how much of their identity do you think is being mimicked by some of these influencers or family, friends, or stuff like that?
You want to take that, or you want me to?
You go ahead.
A lot. I mean, I feel like everything that's happening on social media, and I feel like Gen Z sort of rejects the more traditional channels, but people on YouTube, Instagram baddies, I mean, there's so much out there. Visco girls, like, there's so much that's influencing how I think Gen Z is defining how they want to show up every day. And making decisions based on that. But I think that's one of those universal truths, that it's all what we're surrounded by and what's influencing us. And I think it's very much the same for Gen Z.
I think so too.
Yep.
And I think that another place to really, there's a book called Why She Buys. When you look into maybe gender and the way that women tend to process branding and products a little bit different, they tend to be 5 times more likely to make or break a brand based on how many people they tell. So make sure that you have a really good strategy when it comes to your women consumers. They're representing 85% of the purchases in the marketplace. Whether they're Gen Z or outside of, it's a really powerful cohort. And they're definitely influenced by what their peers are.
One more question, and then after that question, while we're setting up for the Milwaukee Bucks, you could probably quickly come up here, but when we start the Milwaukee Bucks, and I see their presentation, there's a lot of cool stuff. You follow the NBA and the Greek Freak, the MVP, and all that stuff. They have a wonderful thing. When the presentation starts, the doors close and you can't get back in. So unless you really have to get quickly to something, that don't leave, because that once you're shut out, you're not going to be able to get in. So one more question.
You said that Generation Z is more risk averse. How do you get them towards events, engage in that experience? Do you entice them with celebrity, or we're shifting more towards micro-influence like you mentioned? So are we focusing on a certain set, like the older generation, you see Budweiser, you're going to get all the baby boomers. How are you going to get the Gen Zs?
Well, I think that the Gen Z is probably going to be a little more influenced than the micro-influencers because they're cynical. They know advertisers have an agenda, so it's harder. But the more micro-influencers, probably the more progress you're going to make. Okay. They're really not buying into celebrities. If it's the right celebrity, right place, right time, it's always going to work. Like NBA right now is hot, 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 hot. So if you've got the right player with the right time and the right message, it'll have a ton of influence. But it always comes down to really good creative and how you're actually managing to bring something forward that's really authentically engaging. But right now we're focusing more on micro-influencers as we're looking at this generation.
What a great segue. Did you plan that, to line up the Milwaukee Bucks and see what the NBA is doing? How about a big round of applause?
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
So we'll be setting up for the next presentation, which is happening right away. So don't leave your seats or you'll miss a fantastic presentation.